Imagine a US B-17 bomber soaring over Germany in 1944, suddenly finding itself stranded. Forced to make an emergency landing in a Belgian field, it touches down perfectly. But here's the twist: there is no one on board. How could this bomber land itself? Was it a freak accident or a one-in-a-billion miracle? Let's unravel this historical enigma together. Before we dive into this mystery, let's dive into what the B-17 bomber actually is. On July 28, 1935, a four-engine plane took its first flight from Boeing Field in South Seattle. It was simply known as the Model 299 as it rolled out of the Boeing hangar. With its several machine gun positions, Seattle Times reporter Richard Smith called the new plane the Flying Fortress, a moniker that Boeing promptly embraced and patented. The plane was designated as the B-17 by the United States Army Air Corps. In answer to the Army's need for a large, multi-engine bomber, Boeing's prototype proceeded from design board to flight test in less than a year. The B-17 was a low-wing monoplane that blended aerodynamic features from the still under development XB-15 big bomber with the Model 247 transport. The B-17 was the first Boeing military plane to have a flight deck rather than an open cockpit, and it was armed with bombs and 5.30 caliber machine guns positioned in transparent blisters. The British Royal Air Force received 5 B-17s for high-altitude missions in 1941, and the first B-17 saw battle. As World War II progressed, the bombers required more armament and armor. The B-17E, the first mass-produced Flying Fortress, was equipped with 9 machine guns and a 4,000-pound bomb load. It weighed many tons more than the prototypes and was brimming with weapons. It was the first Boeing plane to feature the distinctive and massive tail for greater control and stability during high-altitude bombing. Each version was more heavily equipped than the previous one. The planes developed a terrible reputation in the Pacific with the Japanese, who dubbed them four-engine fighters. The Fortresses were also famous for the capacity to stay aloft even after taking a beating. An 88-year-old veteran wrote the Boeing company a letter 75 years after the B-17's first flight. "I'm glad to be alive," he said after recounting how he returned to England after a bombing operation over Germany with 179 flak holes and only 2 out of 4 engines. "Thank you for creating such an excellent aircraft," is what the veteran wrote. The American Air Commander in Europe, General Carl Spaatz, stated, "Without the B-17, we may have lost the war." Boeing Plan 2 produced a total of 6,981 B-17s in various versions, with an additional 5,745 produced as part of a countrywide collaborative effort by Douglas and Lockheed. Only a few B-17s remain today, on display at museums and air shows. The majority were demolished after the end of the war. On November 23, 1944, anti-aircraft gunners at a British Army post near Brussels were taken aback when they saw a B-17G approaching with its landing gear down. It was flying faster than it should have been for a landing, but it made it. The landing was rough, and one wing collided with the ground, causing the propellers of an outboard motor to shatter. The plane landed approximately 100 feet away from the gunners, and the soldiers waited for the crew to exit. Minutes passed, and 3 of the plane's engines remained operational, but there was no trace of the airmen. Major John Crisp of the Army eventually decided to investigate. Perhaps the crew was injured and needed assistance. However, as he entered the fuselage, there was no one there. Not a single person. He discovered occupation evidence such as partially consumed chocolate bars and a flight record that read cryptically, "Bad flak." The puzzlement began with Major Crisp's report and progressed up the line of command. The tail number of the aircraft revealed it as belonging to the US 91st Bomber Group stationed in eastern England. It was part of a B-17 flight that carried out a daylight strike on oil sites in eastern Germany. Lieutenant Harold R. DeBolt, an accomplished pilot, piloted the aircraft with a crew of 10 people. All of the servicemen were discovered safe and healthy at a Belgian base. According to the pilot and his crew, their aircraft encountered a technical issue and was unable to fly at the same altitude as the rest of the group. Its bomb rack also became a problem. Then, one of the engines was hit by anti-aircraft fire, and another piece of ordnance slammed into the belly of the B-17. "We had been hit in the bomb bay, and for the life of me, I don't know why the bombs didn't blow up," Lieutenant DeBolt reported. Lieutenant DeBolt chose to terminate the mission and return home when 3 engines failed. However, the plane continued to lose altitude, and the pilot ordered that all unneeded equipment be removed. Then, another engine went out. Still, As the plane descended, it became clear that they were not going to make it back to England. The pilot instructed everyone to jump off somewhere around Brussels. After putting the jet on autopilot, Lieutenant DeBolt was the last to exit. The fog of battle is known for producing drastically disparate interpretations of the same event, and this is certainly true of the Phantom Fortress. When the B-17 landed, all 4 engines were obviously functioning, according to soldiers on the ground. Did the 2 damaged engines magically repair themselves after the crew abandoned the plane? When Lieutenant DeBolt said he ordered everything unneeded to be thrown out, why were about a dozen parachute packs on board? Did he mix up empty and full packs? Also, the plane had no evident anti-aircraft damage, according to Major Crisp. The biggest mystery, though, was how the plane landed itself. This was decades before GPS or onboard computers. To land safely, planes of the time required a human at the controls. It's mind-blowing that the plane landed itself as if it knew how to land itself, which any pilot will tell you is preposterous, historian Matthew Black writes. How did the B-17 maintain the proper angle of descent? Was it pure coincidence that it landed in an open field rather than a forest or on a building? Why did it come to a halt when 3 of its 4 engines were still running? None of these discrepancies are addressed in the incident's official report. At the time, military personnel were simply too preoccupied with winning a war to square the circle of competing reports. Were the scientists experimenting with radio-controlled pilotless aircraft that had to land inconveniently in front of perplexed onlookers? Was the crew bailing out a tale concocted to hide a clandestine experiment? These perplexing problems are unlikely to ever be answered. Now we want to know, what is your theory? What actually happened to this B-17? Let us know in the comments and make sure you like and subscribe.